Welcome to the Wednesday after Synod talk. We've lost Andy. He's gone to a baseball game. Probably took Silent Bob with him.
This is Thursday, by the way.
Officially.
Is it Thursday?
Yeah,
It's Thursday.
It's been a long week.
Okay. I'm ready for the old folks home. I don't know what day it is. Today is
Thursday.
June 19th. Happy Juneteenth.
There it is. Yeah.
There it is. Happy Juneteenth. All right. And we just finished up our last Synod session. We'll talk through today, and then we can talk about overall comments, and then maybe we'll do a video with those who want to participate a week or two after Synod to, once things sort of settle in, and once we hear all the feedback, and once people want to...
Assassinations have been completed.
Okay.
For legal reasons. Scott says things that he thinks are funny, and he's joking.
This YouTube video does not express the views of all who are present.
That's right. But that was that in confessional alignment, your statement?
No, it was not. I violated spirits of many things.
All right, so today was Wednesday, and we really had one big...
Thursday.
Today is Thursday.
One time.
And we had one big thing on our agenda, and that was Committee 7, my committee. And that was, we received 2 overtures, one from Southern California that was not affirmed by GLA. And I heard that Classis wasn't real happy with them for that.
They're on the naughty list for a couple of reasons.
All right, so...
I gotta grab my notebook.
But he has a great... Oh, grab my bag for me, because I might want
sure.
my notes.
I got things I got.
I didn't take any notes for obvious reasons. I was just sitting up there.
Standing austerely with
So
great wisdom.
Eric, who is in possession of one of the very... someday that swag might be worth something, Eric. I know you watch that, Rick. He has a pillow with my face on it. Which freaked, it was like, who ordered that? But it was a gift from one of his kids, kind of a funny gift. So anyway, and then Classis Heartland. Classis, so the one church said, chuck the mandate and make a new one. And the other church said, change the mandate. And then they offered some changes. And our advisory team pretty much looked at that and said, most of the team, I said, well, most of the team decided, well, I offered the team, I said, we can either talk to the COD, to the banner advisory team and give them guidance, or we can adjust the banner mandate and deal with it at that level, or we can ask much broader questions about communication and the CRC. And in good CRC fashion, the group wanted the middle option. And so then when we started talking, it seemed that the overture from Heartland had a number of ideas that were in keeping with many members of the community. So then we started to go to work on that. And the advisory committee report is what emerged. And the banner is governed. There's an editor of the banner. And the editor of the banner actually is in a fairly interesting position. The CRC has a variety of communication things. There's actually a communication area, and they do things on the website. But the banner is an old institution in the CRC, and there is built into the banner a certain degree of editorial freedom. So that if the general secretary or an agency head or a pastor does something that is untoward, the banner editor can address that as a banner editor. And so there's an element of journalism. But so then the question was, should the banner mandate be edited? And then for the most part, the idea was the mandate should be brought in. And we discussed that in virtue of that the banner is no longer in the position it was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where, especially in the 70s, this was like the one magazine that households might get. And everybody wanted to read the letters to the editor. And
it was in a lot of bathrooms for bathroom reading.
Okay.
In the 70s.
Thank you, Scott.
True story.
I believe it.
That was exactly the way it was in the Younger's house. There was the little thing beside, and you read the banner, and you would go to other Dutch households, and that's how it was set up.
So the banner was the kitchen table of the denomination.
I like the other image of the bathroom, but that's good. We're good. We're good.
But then part of where a lot of the complaints have arisen is because there were areas. One complaint was that conservative voices were not only given much visibility in the banner, but their positions weren't necessarily brought through. And I think the idea behind that was that, in fact, even though in the right of comment that was in the agenda supplement, the argument was sort of stated that there's the banner as the voice of the institution and the banner as the voice of the people. A lot of people believe that the banner was the voice of the institution against the people. The banner was the voice of propaganda and suppression for conservatives that didn't feel like their views were getting aired, plus the fact that the banner was the official magazine of the Christian Reformed Church, and people would open it and find a diversity of viewpoints, and people looked at that and said, well, if we've got it on the back table of our church, we want visitors to see the viewpoint of the Christian Reformed Church, not viewpoints of the culture. So in other words, the internet changed how the banner would be viewed and the expectations that people would bring to the banner. Instead of the banner being our thing, where we as a family talk about our issues, now for some people, the banner took our dirty laundry and spread it all over the internet, or all over the back tables for visitors to see who came into the denomination. So well, okay, so that's enough of me talking. Let's hear from you guys. How did you read the advisory committee, which basically stewed there for days, which made me very nervous as a chairperson, because if your advisory report just sort of drops an hour before you have to deal with it on the floor, it's like nobody's had time to really pick on this thing. Ours dropped, and people had days to look at it, talk to people back home, type up, so amendments. So I was a little, I thought, this thing's going to get worked over, but there it was.
I was split on it going into it, honestly, because as a writer who's written for different publications, there was a part of me that was like, I'm going to be suspicious of anything that's trying to we're only looking for these voices. So that, my initial read was are we getting back into some of this overreach kind of space? That being said, I haven't been a huge fan of the banner anymore for me is I open it to the table of contents, I look through to see if I know anybody who wrote anything, and then it's that's it. So that piece of it was interesting for me to kind of think through, but then I don't know, the moment that swayed my vote was what I think was an iconic Paul Vanderklay moment as chair. The speech that I was like, he's right. He's right. And the metaphors changed, and I was like, okay. And then to start thinking of it more as the voice of the institution, instead of it being this is where we're gonna work things out, because that's not the forum where we work those things out anymore, right? So, yeah, I was happy with where it went, I think, though I could very much understand the hesitancy of, I don't want this to become, I don't want it to become a propaganda brochure of
Yes.
Let's sell you on our beautiful church, the Christian Reformed Church. Which, and maybe I shouldn't say that on the internet.
But name the image that he used for the people who didn't hear it, because that I think is the part that when you started talking and we started clapping, that's what we're thinking of, right? So
Paul went from the kitchen table, which comes up over and over again,
it's been forever. It's been forever that we've used that image.
Yeah, and Paul talked about Paul was speaking for the younger generations.
You're
Yeah, super cool, dude.
All speaking for all of the digital natives, that maybe they're not looking for, they find themselves in a cafeteria of options, and that actually they're looking to know what people really believe and think. And that's when I was like, that's right. The landscape's changed.
Yeah.
Whether I appreciate this as a publication or we have to if we're going to look at a mandate, we have to relook at what this is speaking into and the ecosystem that it's going into. And that's what kind of pushed me over on that, just over the line on that. Although I still do have concerns about, I don't know if you all received a magazine after Synod last year by
I was not Synod last year.
By a Christian Reformed adjacent group.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was like, well, that was fine. It fit under the Abide umbrella of what they were putting out. I was surprised to receive it to my church, right? But I was like, oh, this is a very interesting piece of the conversation to me. I don't want that for the banner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, the Abide magazine. Oh yeah, I got the Abide magazine. They sent it to me.
Right. So that is not the future I hope the banner has either. And that's appropriate, whatever, for Abide's group to put out their own stuff. I'm not saying anything overtly against the Abide people.
The banner's never had a woman editor, someone who's
but,
practiced in magazines and
we should find her. I'm sure she has lots of time on her hands to take on a ginormous project like that.
Maybe if her husband's employment is a little uncertain, she might want to bring a little bit more income into the house.
It's not anymore. Praise the Lord.
She needed a steal in order to get that to happen.
When we were engaging in that conversation on the forum, by the way, those of you, it had the most people in the queue of all of our stuff, which is saying something.
Did it really?
At one point, there were over 40 in the queue.
Really?
I did not
There
know
was
that.
41 at least.
I put my name in the queue just so I could take the picture of there are 40 people in the queue and your position is 40. So I have that on my phone.
So it was a long conversation, and save, unfortunately, for about maybe 20 to 25% of it, it was non-constructive conversation. We had about 25% of it that really spoke to the issues on the floor. The rest of the 75 was anecdotal or personal experience or an affirmation of something that already got said. However, I would have loved to interact with the mandate unique from the rest of the recommendations. That's my only, I shouldn't say only, but it is one of the concerns that I have, because to me, when you change a mandate, which is a pretty significant activity, and they change to the mandate, to me, was very clear. It was clear, it was concise, and we all knew what we were saying with it. And it was about addressing that the mandate of the banner is to reflect basically the denominational, confessional, its understanding of the confessions, its understanding of synodical decisions, all that stuff. And then you had these other things that came up later on that were recommendations, and I don't know the vocabulary of where those fit into the mandate or what banner is given. But if you affect the mandate, and the mandate is clearly impacted by what, and it was the number 5 on the mandate, everything else falls under that, and in submission to that. And I would have loved to, because we are in the moment we are, affirm the change to the mandate, and then separate it out the other one, which I think could have been, because it's the posture, right? It's the visuals, that it could have affected the reception of this by the banner and staff. However, and I need to be clear with folks, I was thinking about that, not knowing your experience on committee, and you can choose whether or not you want to see that experience. But there were said words said on the floor today by the editor of the banner that were also spoken of in committee that made what did happen, it made it understandable. I can understand why it happened now, not having known that until afterwards. But I still think, unfortunately, at the end of the day, let's be honest, banner gets the first hit at this. I shouldn't say it. They get the first shot at communicating the message. at least most comprehensively. They get to write the article that will go onto the banner page. If it's not already there, it'll be there by the end of the day.
That's right.
So they get to do that.
I'm kind of curious to see what comes through.
Absolutely, and I'm curious too. But
we're here to set the record straight.
Yeah. But
5 days later, when you're watching this.
But if it had been as simple, and I see simplicity as also a really important thing in these conversations, it would have been as simple as adding one point to your mandate that is clear to all of us, and also clear in its authority because it's your mandate. Could we then function differently with how we express the rest of it? That I'd be curious about. I know now why that happened, it makes sense, but still, because the optics are important here, I wonder how that's going to play out. And probably the one that was most sensitive to me as I heard it, I hate to say this, you're gonna knock me on it, but that the Canadian voices are going to respond to this differently than the American voices. And so in all of that, like, there's a dynamic here which we did what we did, we understand why we did it, we even, can agree to varying degrees on it. However, the fallout from it is something that we're gonna have to really watch closely and see what happens, because that's gonna play out in unexpected ways, in unexpected context.
That's something that took me, that was surprising. Well, I hadn't thought of it, but then when I saw it, it wasn't surprising. How on the floor, the Canadian perspective differentiated. In our team, we had gender representation, we had ethnic representation, we had binational representation in terms of Canadian, and there was no differentiation in our committee between Canadian and American takes on this. So when it came up on the floor, it's like, oh, I understand that, because I think that's true. I think it is going to play differently. But, and now I'm about to say something that might also be controversial, and you as a Canadian are going to have to let me know what you think of that. I think the media environment in Canada is different than it is in the United States.
Yes.
From what I've seen, a lot of Canadian media has been subsidized
by the Canadian government.
And so one of the main issues I wanted to make with this is the reason the mandate needs to be adjusted is because the banner is living in a very different media environment than it ever has. And if we're not thinking in those terms, I think we can help the banner live better within the Christian Reformed Church and serve the Christian Reformed Church better by acknowledging that change in media environment and therefore making the adjustments we made. So
I think, and I wonder about this, and obviously we're going to have the reactions that we do of the banner staff, and we're going to have to navigate that, or they will have to navigate, or whoever's going to have to navigate. But did we give them a mandate in which a group of people who have bought into the vision of the banner can flourish? I think that's important, because it's like anything, right? It depends on the people who are in there and what they do with whatever the vision that they're buying into is. Can there be theological confessional exploration within the mandate that they've been given? I think there can. It's just how you do it and who you do it with and the posture in which you do it with. Like even that thing, and I think Eustace, either you or the reporter said today, that when a previous banner editor would put a controversial article, he was always open to having at least one page for a counterpoint.
That's what H.J. Kuiper said he would like to do and never did.
Well,
but H.J. Kuiper, that was we're talking 1930s, 40s, 50s.
But even if that were, if that actively were a posture that the banner presently had executed, I wonder how that would change the experience of what we're talking about here.
Well, let's hear from Casey, and then I've got a few more thoughts on the point.
Yeah, I appreciate what your committee had to say. I appreciate the work that was done there. I think the bigger picture conversation, right, that led into this. This has been going on for a long time. I was at Synod in 2017, and there were people that were upset about articles then, without there being disclaimers at the bottom of them that this is not the position of the CRC. I mean, there was stuff going on, and prior to that. So this has been coming for a long time. It's strange to me that the banner itself didn't start to pivot going back to 2017. I feel like that's a bigger picture. And then you had said something afterwards with regard to where even what is the intention? Do we have a banner in 5 years? Maybe that was Scott. And that's a bigger picture conversation about all that stuff. Hey, Rod.
There he comes. Probably have to move the camera back a little bit.
Tell me.
Okay, shift it a little bit to the left. Good, Rod's in. All right.
Are you done? Yeah, that was kind of it. Like that, it's the reason the speaker queue was so big. This has been going on for a long time. It's been a big conversation for a long time. That's how we got to this point. I'm curious and surprised that there hasn't been shifting happening already. That we had to get to this point. At least point to something and go, see, we're listening to some of the more conservative voices that want to see these things. Look, we have these articles from these people. And then, I might have to edit. Yeah. And then some of it too is just, I don't know all of the details, so there's probably a technical way why this happened and it didn't. But again, I think, running an ad for Better Together and not being willing to run an ad for Abide, again, the bigger picture conversation that's been happening, and then, so that led to this, and then you had said, I forget, we were chatting afterwards, what does the banner even look like in 5 years? And aligned with what you had said, which was, have we now given to people who are currently on staff there a mandate that they wouldn't be passionate about and don't want to fulfill anyway, which would be a tough thing? I don't know any of those bigger picture question things, but that's what's interesting.
I thought the switch in the metaphor, when people were kind of starting to play with that, was really helpful for me, as being the kitchen table, the cafeteria, but then someone made a delegate talked about the front door, and then I talked to another delegate, it was like the front porch. And I was like, that actually is a helpful frame for me to think about. What if the banner could serve as a front porch conversation, as that place in between the frontward facing part of the Christian Reformed Church? It's still engaging. It's not just this closed circuit of our own inward fighting, but is outward facing. I thought that was a helpful metaphor for me.
One person on our committee noted, and rightly so, because I went back to my dorm room and did a little AI searching. He noted, AI scrapes, who is the Christian Reformed Church? AI gets a lot of that stuff from the banner website. And when I was digging a little bit deeper, again, the two issues of the banner that got the most publicity were 1980, Time to Burn the Wooden Shoes, which everybody in the room did, and 1970, the banana.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's a huge thing that's going to happen now, because Scott Vanderploeg over lunch made the point.
Interesting.
Scott Vanderploeg over lunch made the point of basically the market versus, and to me, part of what was really interesting about Chong's metaphor was the hothouse tomato. In many ways, a lot of our denominational ministries have been hothouse tomatoes. And that can be really good if you have a market for hothouse tomatoes. But Scott Vanderploeg said, if the banner hadn't been sort of cordoned off in our little CRC containment unit, that would have been gone years ago. The RCA lost the Church Herald years ago. This kind of denominational publication basically went away in the 90s and aughts.
Denominationally funded publication.
Right.
That is an important distinction.
Right.
And that was something else that Scott brought up. If the banner had made the shift, or we had made the shift and said to the banner, you are no longer going to receive your funds automatically through ministry shares, but instead you are going to be a subscription-based magazine. They would have had to explore a market, and they would have had to decide where is our engagement, who is buying subscriptions, who is engaging with the banner. And then, if that were the case, first of all, we would if you're not paying money for it, you have a lot less authority over it. That's one thing. The second thing is, they would have had to live into business principles and figure out what would have helped them most survive. Like if that would have happened and they put their finger on something and all of a sudden you expand to 300,000 or 400,000 subscriptions because they put their finger on something, that'd change the story completely, right? But if all of a sudden you're dropping because you write an article about a pagan worship service that is attended by one of the writers, and then suddenly, without any sort of disclaimer or clarity, and then suddenly you drop by 10,000 subscriptions.
You received a message.
You are clearly understanding what your market is and responding to your market.
And this gets back to the conversation we had last night about markets. And there was a decision made about the banner a while ago to make it into ministry shares. And part of the reason for that, again, these are all downsizing reasons, because individual agencies were sending out their high-priced glossy mailings that was costing money. Why not unfold it into the banner? So actually this question towards an institutional voice, this happened a couple decades ago.
And it wasn't just based on banners needs, it was based on a whole lot of other institutional needs.
That's right. So the story of the banner is a pretty long and complex one. And so because if you look at, let's say, direct competitor, let's say, to Christianity Today. Yeah. But Christianity Today is a parachurch organization in sort of the queen of the parachurches in terms of the rise of neo-evangelicalism. The banner was a weekly publication in the Christian Reformed Church. It was in many ways sort of the lifeblood of a distributed denomination in an era where magazines were
king.
Yes. Magazines are gone. And now you might say, well, compared to something like First Things, almost all of these things today, does Reformed Journal, when did they stop having a paper copy of the Reformed Journal?
Checking.
Okay, can I ask a side question?
Yes, then we got going right in.
What is the banana?
Ooh, that's a good question.
It got referenced, and then Andy and I were like trying to find it online and couldn't find it. Although I did see that Al Postma tweeted a link to it, and so I opened it like a PDF version of it, and I was looking at it real quick. But I'm like, I don't understand what I'm looking at.
In 1970, the Chimes. There's been a tradition at the Chimes, which is Chimes is the college newspaper of Calvin College. In 1970. The Chimes published as their last edition, The Banana, to satire the banner.
Importantly, who were the writers?
1990,
Reformed Journal stopped in 1990.
Who were the writers? And I don't even, I know their big names, but I can't remember. You'll know that more than I am, more than I do.
You know?
I don't know all of their names, but one of them was an elder at a church in northern New Jersey who one day was like, did you hear about that? Have you heard? I go, yeah, it's like legendary. And he shows up with a manila envelope and he opens it, and I very carefully peeled all of the pages and read all of them. He had an original copy because he was one of the authors.
There were less than 100 poems.
Well, because it was, as you know, then suddenly Spoolhoff, who then president of the college, gets you've got to scoop all these things up. The banner cannot be satirized. That is a holy thing. This is sputting. You don't even know what that word means.
Do not. Sounds bad.
My mother.
Lava soap is involved.
I'll tell you about sputting someday. My mother to this day, she claims innocence when she lived in the coops, and you'd say, what the heck are the coops? The coops were these little housing areas where the men and the women on the Franklin campus lived at Calvin College. My mother got got in trouble for singing bawdy lyrics to hymny tunes. And she claims to this day, innocent. She was innocent. She never did that. It'd be like making up new words and singing it to a song in the Psalter hymnal. Serious trouble in the 1950s. And so what the Banana was sort of this first movement of liberation. It was the Calvin College piece of their counterculture. And that group who did the Banana became the elites of the denomination in the 90s and the aughts. A lot of them retired in the aughts. And so that Banana then set the tone for what the Banner needs to do is tell truth to power. The Banner needs to shake the power structures of the denomination and open the doors and let the sunshine in. I'd like to give the world a Coke. I mean, it's all in there. And that has been the ethos of the Banner, which means that there's a really, and again, I don't think the Banner is the only denominational element. It's gonna move his wash. The only denominational property that's gonna have to pivot now, because as you know, when I talked about the boomers on the floor, I can't believe I talked about the boomers.
I know.
So when I talked about the boomers, because all of those boomers come into this conflict formed by the Banana, and by that moment, and by throwing off the oppression of the H.J. Kuyper denomination. And they've got plenty of dutiful young children, dutiful college-age grandchildren and children who are pretty much aligned with them. But then there's this whole other group. Our young adult rep in our committee gave a speech. All of the younger people in our committee basically said, when I first saw the Banner, and they only first saw it as young adults. When I first saw the Banner, I opened up and it's like, what is this? Yeah. There's like movie reviews, and for the demographic that grew up with the Banana, to have a movie review in the Banner, that was liberation. Because when they grew up, you didn't go to the movies, and now we're sporting our freedom in Christ by having movie reviews. But kids today are like, why would you have a movie review? Because movies are just part of what they swim in. But the Banana people were like, this is where we express our particular take, our Kuyperian transformationalism. We can go to a movie and critique it from a Christian point of view. That's the bread and butter of that generation. And this new generation is living in the cafeteria saying, Mom and Dad, they took us to church, but they just kind of want to know about our feelings. And I want to know what they'll die for. And I think that's the big difference.
By the way, little note, the Banana renamed the Christian Reformed Church as the Philistin Rewarmed Church. That was how they called it. It was near graduation, and there were calls for them not to graduate. In fact, there was an overture at Synod that year.
Of course
that they not be, we feel that permanent expulsion of the students responsible for this publication is not too severe a penalty. So you want to...
Wild times.
Wild crazy. So, I mean, as much, and I think actually, I don't want to belittle what we did today, but it's like saying we're at the worst time in history, which we say all the time, right? Or, this is the biggest thing that's ever happened in the history of whatever it is. This Banner conversation has been around in much more inflammatory terms at different times in our history. And right now, even with what happened today here, in terms of influence, I mean, at the end of the day, in terms of influence, how much does that actually impact our church and our denomination? I mean, I don't mean that we put a tempest in a teapot, even with working as much as we did on this, but to some degree, I would say it's, I don't know that it's a non-entity, but it's certainly not a vital one within our denomination. And I'm not saying that, you know, prescriptively, I'm just saying it's descriptively. Yeah.
Rod, you're the oldest in the group. What say you about today's discussion on the banner? You've lived this history.
Yeah. I actually read of the banner back in the day when they first came out, and I was laughing hard and thinking, this is great. And then was told that that wasn't great.
Sputton. You have to use Sputton for that.
Which my mother literally, you know, I mean, I'm not kidding about the lava soap. She would take lava soap and wash her mouth out if you used Sputton, or if you used barnyard words. If you swore, you had to go talk to the elders, but if you used barnyard words, then you got your mouth washed out. So, which was good. Except that happened a lot to me. And so...
Can you make sure he's in the camera now?
Oh.
Yeah, he is.
Okay.
Just.
So I think there's two kinds of people, right? There are people who read to be challenged, and there are people who read to be affirmed. And I think we have that split, right? You have all these people who just, I want to have my beliefs affirmed. I want us to hold fast. I want to only read what I agree with. I'm the opposite. I only want to read what I disagree with. I already know what I think. I want to know what somebody else thinks. I want to be challenged to think differently. And that's just two different worlds. And I've noticed that in what theology books people choose to read. Oh, and you kind of saw that in the exams, right? Like I read CRC approved theologians, right? Whereas the other guy says, I read some unapproved, you know, lots of them. And I found that striking, because I think that's the us who just read what we agree with. I don't learn anything from reading what I agree with. Never have. And I've never been challenged. Like, it's like, oh, okay, that's what we believe. Yeah, okay, I got it. I memorized the Heidelberg Catechism. Great, perfect. Now I'm done. Right? Like, so somehow, how do you invite people who don't want to be challenged to be challenged? How do you invite people who always want to be challenged to say, no, here's a firm, fixed place? And I do agree about the young adult thing is an interesting deal, because I deal with these guys a lot, right? And they do want, just tell me the answer, right? Because when I grew up, there was one answer, right? George Washington chopped down the cherry tree, but he did it, and he took his punishment, and everything was okay. You could know that for a fact, because you went down to the library, you did the catalogs, and you found the book, and it said, George Washington chopped down the cherry tree. It was just a fact. It wasn't a myth, it was a fact. Well, now, if I want to know, are eggs good for me or bad for me? And I Google that, I'll spend the rest of my life reading every single report. And then you got to figure out who funded that report and why they funded it and what their take is. So we have this huge amount of data, and we can't process it. We just can't. And we're desperate for one person to say, this is it. Yeah. Rod, you need to believe in infant baptism. And if you don't, you're going to die. You know, like, they just want it simple. Like,
Gutsy to say that next to Aaliyah. I'd be more comfortable from there.
But I'm serious. I think we want, well, not about the death thing. I don't care about getting the right answer right off. I do circle in on one, but I firmly believe in infant baptism. I love it. I love everything about it. I want everybody to love it and understand covenantal theology and the whole bit. These young guys, I want to wrestle with them about baptism. They don't want to wrestle. They just want an answer. Tell me what I should do.
Well, yeah, and to that point, right, like we heard at least one person, one pastor on the floor of Synod saying that exact kind of thing. I kind of feel for them with regard to, I've got to do apologetics for these people and help them in all these aspects of their lives. If I'm getting hit from my own side, from the publication, they read it and they don't like it, I've got to defend the banner on a regular basis to my own people.
Yeah.
At some point you go, I got to cut bait with this thing because I can't keep fighting on these two different fronts of things. And again, I realize that's not been the intention of the, but that was some of the sentiment. And I hear that and I go, oh, yeah, that does sound exhausting.
It is. And the truth is, none of the people that I'm working with read the banner. They've never even heard of the banner.
Right.
Until they came here, they go, oh.
So that doesn't fit you. But for the guy in Oskaloosa.
Exactly. And that's right. If you're in that, in the, out on the edge, it's like, it's not a thing. The only reason that people read the banner now is because, oh, Rod gets published in it, my little goofy stories. And so, oh, we read Rod's story. And by what, oh, let me see what else is in here, because we like Rod's story, or they don't. And then we'll read this other stuff. Oh, that's cool. Or that's different, or what is that about? And you're right about the reviews and all those kinds of things. My wife, same age as me, loves to go look at book reviews there, because then she knows what novel to write or to buy next on her, I get it. But, yeah. So it's a whole different, I liked where it landed in the sense of, okay, who are you building the church for? For yourself, or for the next generation, or the generation after that? Like, that's, how do people get information? And I think that huge, massive, seismic change of the internet giving me unlimited access to everything. So what, we're using AI, to narrow down, right? Because now I only have to look at 4 things instead of 450 million.
Right. I see real peril in this because the banner has been a hothouse tomato in many ways. The audience has been cultivated, and so many people, like your wife, have been conditioned to look for certain things in the banner.
Right.
And the audience for the banner has been our generation.
Exactly.
That has a perspective and has expectations. Now, there's been that other conservative element in the Christian Reformed Church that just out of sheer doggone loyalty, even though maybe they grew to love to hate it, I don't know. But just sheer doggone loyalty, just kept, reading it just to be annoyed by it. And maybe they'll be happy, but I think the real question, the banner is going to get off the ministry share element, and we talked about that in committee, and that's about 12 to 13% of their budget. It's from ministry share. So that it's not insignificant, but it's possibly not terminal. But the banner, along with a number of other denominational ministries that are in some ways hothouse tomatoes, are over the next 20 years going to have to really figure out how to live, because part of what the internet means is, I don't care what you think about markets, you're living in one. You are living in an information market, and unless you can sort of go toe-to-toe with that flood that's coming in, now it might be that the Christian Reformed Church once again sort of Benedict options itself and figures out how to put the walls up. But if our walls didn't withstand radio, okay, well now we have Peter Eldersveld to listen to in Joel Naderhood. Whew! Then we dipped our toe into television and that didn't go anywhere. But, if the CRC couldn't stand up to television and radio and newspapers and magazines buy its own thing, what's it going to do with the internet?
And to your point of who has it been cultivated for, there's a reason this came up this year. A significant portion of the people that have been cultivated to read it and have liked it are not in the denomination any longer.
I don't know how much they read it either, but yes,
but
that's their market.
They appreciated the mandate as it was before today.
That's right. That's right. And those are the ones, the few that were left, who's kind of stood up and fought for it. And some of them are already feeling sort of on the edge. And that gets into, we wound up being the first committee and the last committee.
Well done, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Inclusio and all that jazz.
But my concern with, and I'm not blaming the executive at all in this, because it's a tough thing to put this thing together, and then they just kind of strode through and they got us done on time. But the fact that we ended on this note, I think is particularly difficult, because overall, I think the Synod has been one to say, let's trust more. And a lot of that is to that audience that has felt disenfranchised by the war that's just been fought and the disaffiliations that are happening, and they're sort of on the bubble. And I don't want this to undo many, because almost everything else in the Synod was sort of like, we're sort of finding our way back together. And now at the end we take this. I mean, when you look at the banner, you realize what a sacred cow that was to the previous generation. And so their triumph by owning the banner for, the last really, Kuyvenhoven takes over in the 80s, 1980. The wooden shoe article, I think, was the beginning of the new era of the banner. Since 1980, the Boomers, the banner has been their banner. They've owned this publication. I mean, John Sook, another name, no longer, he left the CRC to go mainline. And so the banner...
Look at me when you said that.
Well, because you don't know it. These guys know it.
I remember him walking the halls.
Yeah.
At denominational institution. He was there.
Yeah. So the banner was the banner of the people of the banana generation who were victorious over that bad old age of repression. And so I was very conscious of the fact that, I thought, for my part, do we go gentle, or do I just use that pulpit at Synod to try to say something to that generation of, please, what you did to your parents, your grandchildren are doing to you. And if you wanted your parents and your grandparents to be gentle, please listen to your grandchildren. Because the times they are a-changing.
One other thing that I'm just thinking through about this conversation is how, and I think it's an important thing for us to reflect on. We mirror culture in this conversation enormously.
Yep.
Because if you think about, and I'm painting with broad strokes, but if you think sort of the political dichotomy that we are in, and part of that dichotomy has been named as the liberals got the institutions and the media, and then the conservatives ended up in the legal realm, legal and business. Although, however you want to take that. However, clearly, in culture, the education and the media realm, and that's what this discussion was to some degree. Was it mirrors cultures where you have a conservative constituency, and I think we saw that with our interaction with Calvin University, we saw it with Calvin Seminary certainly, and now we have it here where we're literally mirroring the reality of a culture where you have that tension between these two groups and all the expressions of them in different ways, but that's what we had here. And so, just to remind ourselves, CRC, we think we're distinct, we think we're outside of culture. You right here. This was an expression of just how much we are expressing the world that we live in.
Yep.
Biosphere 1 died, and then Biosphere 2 happened, right? There's a number of things here, and the point was, how do we live on Mars, right?
Yeah.
So we can take this whole thing up, build this deal on Mars, and we can live. Cool. How's that going to work, right? Well, we have to generate oxygen. We have to have water. We have to, we have to have
wind.
We have to recycle all that stuff. Technically, you wouldn't have had to have wind because you could keep out of but the trees were dying too quick, right? That was, and so the fun thing is metaphor is interesting because if you were on Mars, and in some ways we are, right? We're on Mars, but we want all the accoutrement of what we have here. And so, do I need to be strong on Mars? Do I need to have, is it okay if the tree falls? Well, I'm still eating, I'm still drinking, do I need shade? Does it only provide shade, or are there other ways to provide shade? So I think it's really fun to kind of follow that, or for me it's fun.
I'm with you. Metaphors are so helpful.
To follow that path down. Like we think, oh, we have to have all the things we have here when we're on Mars. Do we?
Yeah, bring your little Earth colony that you've set up under your little dome. This is our little CRC spot, and we're setting up under the dome.
Right. Yeah.
But it's actually a completely different world around you.
Right.
Yeah, that's a fascinating metaphor.
Do I get an A?
Yeah, gold star. Gold star for him.
Another element of this synod was we saw pivots. I mean, the Calvin College, the Calvin Seminary, we talked about that the other night, and then the Calvin College pivot. The college has figured out we have to pivot. And again, Calvin is another one of these holy, sacred institutions. The banana happened at Calvin. The student revolution in the CRC was launched at Calvin. And so for Calvin to pivot, there's and this is really tricky in the CRC. Now, many of them are disaffiliating, but we can understand and should have some compassion on their shock, their anger, because a revolution took place. And again, the ironies are deep, because the generation that in a sense launched the revolution against their previous generations has now had a revolution launched against them. And I know when I say that, people get annoyed, but it's so funny because these are my people, and they've all said, be prepared to be uncomfortable. And I say to them, be prepared, but not this kind of discomfort. It was the kind of discomfort that I wanted. Be prepared to listen. I don't want to listen to that. And so there's just some ironies in here. And this is going to, the Christian Reformed Church is in a tricky place, because in many ways, you depend on that older generation often to finance causes. You depend on them to do a lot of volunteer work in churches because everybody's got these two-income things going on. So, yeah, we're in an interesting pivot.
Well, it seems, in order to not let the pendulum just swing and we stay in this kind of broken cycle, and this is what it is, that my traditionalist generation will arise and have strict Sabbatarianism brought back. I'm like, oh, actually, it's pretty important that we are listening to each other here, because we do need the corrective that happened, right? My son will mow the lawn on Sundays because that's when it gets done. So
Button.
Mom, bring the lava.
My concern, I guess, looking out now is are we shutting off that conversation now because it's just this? People leave, and is there no way out of this cycle?
That's my appeal to so many of my friends. It's like, don't leave. I understand if you have a strong conviction that makes it impossible for you to serve and be in the Christian Reformed Church, I get it. I honor that. Set up a parallel, please. Don't go to the RCA. Just set up a parallel. Be next to us, because I think we're going to want to be together as we go forward. So if you don't have to leave, don't leave. Because I'm so glad John Tamming was at this synod. And John Tamming's been on Voices. And John Tamming was a guy who stood up and with passion, and he could articulate that voice that is in many ways being pushed out. I don't want John Tamming to leave. I don't want these other people to leave. I want us to continue the conversation. Whether they want to, I don't know. That's up to them.
Yeah, and that, I think that's a key point. That's where I think, like, the optics and how we approach this, because I mean, I can name people in my life who are going to be, they're out, but they're going to be reading all the stuff. It's what happens, right? You leave, but you're still curious about what you left. And there's enough stuff with this that they're going to say, that's why I left. There it is.
Yeah.
Yep. Clamping down. Control. Got to make sure everything's orthodox. And so for like you want to communicate to those people, please, like, let's remember 150, or it wasn't 150 years, but it was at least 130 years after we engaged or disengaged from the RCA. We at least had it coming back together of sorts. Yeah, I know where we are now, we all understand that. But we were close enough along the way that we were able to continue to knock up against each other in helpful and constructive ways. I hope that's the case for some of these things in the future, because I really like those people. I disagree with them, but I like them. I love them. And I want to keep on having that conversation. So don't leave too far.
You have a poem.
Would you read the poem, Rod?
It's pretty long.
Oh, well, what is this poem in?
It's a little book of poems that I wrote a lot of time ago. Yeah.
You don't just carry your works around with you in every case.
I did, because somebody said, "Hey, Rod, could you show me that poem?" And I want to take time to.
That's fine.
They say the only innocents are children when they're little, but as a child I did a thing for which I'd like acquittal. Cousin Ed and Cousin Howard had come to spend the day. My mom told me and Sister Miriam, now run outside and play. We chased around the yard a while, then headed for the barn. The four of us climbed to the loft, and there begins my yarn. We worked and built a fort of hay by dragging bales around, and when you crawled way back inside it, you could hardly hear a sound. Howard was our oldest cousin. He could shoot a 12-gauge gun. He bragged that once he'd winged an owl and shot a rabbit on the run. He said he'd learned some cuss words and that he dared to say one. And when Miriam said, "I double dare ya," he spit and said the A one. Then my sister said the S word to prove she wasn't dumb. And Edwin said what folks might say when their hammer hits their thumb. Then all of them looked down at me. I thought for just a while, and I strung all three together and said them with a smile. We laughed and snorted right out loud. We thought we were well hid. But Mother has this extra sense, and it told her what we did. She had brought some brownies to the barn to give us all a snack, but when she heard our barnyard words, she took a different tack. She stormed right up the ladder of rungs. No doubt our goose was cooked, and I remember to this day the way my mother looked. She grabbed us all by ears and hair. Her face was brightest red. No, there was not a single doubt. We knew that we were dead. Then we were hauled down from the loft. She beat us on the rump and yelled for me to go and get some water from the pump. She soaked a bar of lava soap. We knew that we were cursed. When Howard cried, "I'm not your kid," my mom said, "Good, you're first." The bar was shoved half in his mouth. He sputtered, spit, and choked. Huge tears were streaming down his face. And when he talked, he croaked. My sister was the next to go. Mom washed away her sin. Then Edwin started whimpering and said, "I'm only 10. When my turn came, she grabbed my hair. I fell down on my knees, but she was way past listening to my heartbroken pleas. I swore I'd never cuss again. She listened to my blather, then scrubbed my mouth with lava soap until she made a lather. My mom is known for cleanliness. Her floors are spick and span. But what she did to my poor mouth, drill sergeants would have banned. The taste was one I'll not forget until the day I died, like broccoli and kerosene wrapped up in lard and lye. My teeth clamped down, my taste buds died, my tongue it threw a fit. The only thing I'd taste for weeks was hummus mixed with grit. And though I rinsed my mouth out well, still I suffered trouble. Whenever I would try to speak, I thought I could blow a bubble. Sometimes today when wrenches slip, I'm tempted still to swear. I hear my sister Miriam say, "Hey Rod, I double dare." My mouth then gets this funny taste. I see my mother's face. She holds a bar of dripping soap and there's no hope of grace. Instead of saying what I think, my mind begins to race. Because moms can still buy lava soap, stores sell it by the case. The moral is, when things go wrong, don't cuss like some poor dope. Mother might be standing near with a bar of lava soap. Come on.
I have to tell you, before I came here and I heard you guys are going, I was like, my two very small goals for Synod are, I want to meet Paul and Rod in person, and I want to hear a poem from Rod on the floor of Synod, which didn't happen, but this small group, even better. So thank you so much. That was well done.
It's really funny that I would have to have brought that. Happened to happen, and I did not plan this at all. Except for this friend of mine said, "Hey, you have a poem I'd like to." I don't remember it, and I didn't want to take the time, so I just threw the book in the bag. Here I am. And then we start talking about lava, or we start talking about lava, so it's like, oh, I got a poem.
Highlight of Synod right there.
All right, Synod is done. What will this, we had Synods 2022 to 2024, historic Synod, sea change in the Christian Reformed Church. How will this Synod be remembered, if at all?
If the church planting movement becomes a movement, if that energy moves into something, this could be the Synod that's pointed back to as when we got busy with church planting again. But
and I think I wondered about that beforehand. We've talked about the things we have talked about for as long as we have talked about them. The only way to move away from that is to find a new topic of conversation that is passion fueled. And if that is the case with church planting, then maybe this is a pivot, which I would consider to be a positive move towards the kingdom.
We need to build something.
Yep,
right?
We need to build something. And I think the words from the floor are well taken. Like, it's existential in nature. The reality is we can't exist presently without doing something. Yeah.
It's hard for me to see it more broadly because I now get to undo all the work I did to make Orangewood Community Church in Phoenix a joint ministry of the RCA and the CRC. I have spent hundreds of hours on making that happen beautifully, and ministry is happening, and now, wait, I gotta do that in the next 5 years, or try to convince this church to become CRC, which they may well do, but you know, and then you start, and then the whole church planting thing for me is huge. Leadership development. I just love, you know, we have to train elders and deacons. What? That is so not scriptural. Elders should be teaching us, right? That's what the whole point of an elder. You look at the hoary head in your congregation, the gray beard as it is, and you say, okay, they should be teaching us, right? And then all of a sudden, no, we have to teach them. How arrogant of pastors that they think they're going to teach elders. Elders are teaching pastors. I just, it just blows my mind sometimes. I think so I get lost in the weeds of those kinds of things, and I have a hard time taking the big picture. I was surprised that it was as congenial as it was, that there weren't people calling each other names, and there weren't people stomping out, and so I think there was this start towards mutuality, and I like that, and I hope that becomes the thing that we can vehemently disagree without being vehemently disagreeable.
I still felt the factions.
Sure. Oh yeah, they're there.
I mean, and I felt them actually strongly a couple times. It wasn't verbal, but it was certainly in a couple postures. Like, there was one officer, I walked past him on several occasions, head up, looking in the eye. Looked away every time.
Is that a faction or is that a you?
Which mode were you in? Were you speaking
Was
for
it
women?
Scott the woman? Was it Scott the 8-day-old? Was it Scott the Canadian? Maybe just doesn't like Canadians.
You are.
This is why I do not watch your videos. Never watching.
I mean, I'm gonna go watch it and then rewind. And
I'm gonna clip this moment out of this video. I had to turn it into branding. I
There's
play on my
only
channel
one
every
thing
week.
stopping me from saying many, many things, and that is the fact that this will be accessible on the internet. No, I still feel there is still the clicks. I still do, and I'm not afraid to say this. I think that Abide, I will say it this way, Abide in some of its previous expressions, to me, is something that engenders caution and protection. I need to be cautious and protect myself from some of the way that things have gone. I hope that and a whole lot of that is on me, but I think it's also on how folks who live into that sort of context. I think it's how they interact with those of us who are in a different place than they are. I think that's important, and I hope that less. I mean, certainly 22, 23, 24 were marked by significant Abide movement. I hope that becomes less so over time. Be conservative, be traditional, so be it. Be how you are going to believe what you believe passionately, but not as a block, or not as an organized block, if that makes sense.
I concur. I feel that separation as well. I mean, you see people sitting. I'm blind enough that I don't know who's where or who's what, but I know all these members of this group are sitting here, and all the members of this group are sitting there, and they're. But then I saw a lot of that cross pollination as well, like where people.
It was there.
One of my things. It's a church planter thing, right? You always start a new table. Paul gives me crap about this, but you always go sit at a table with no one around, so that people, because nobody wants to start a table, and then, but they also are intimidated by the people that they got to sit by, and so then it's kind of fun to see who comes and sits and picks your brain. And I had people from the far right and the far left who came and sat at my table and we chatted. There's a story I can't tell, but it was really fun to people I would not have expected to be supportive of the things I said from the floor. Suddenly go, so wow, what's it like out there in the front, and what would I have to do? What would we, because we don't
Good.
So, you know, and that's what I mean by the kind of cross-pollination stuff that helps. And I think I think Scott Vanderploeg is a right guy, and I think that was again, Mr. Vanderploeg goes to.
Isn't he known as the one who gets whatever he wants? Isn't that what you're calling him?
Right. That is him.
And I enjoyed that part of it. I also enjoyed that it was not just tolerated, but yay, let's do this. And money's not the problem, leadership is, and we dealt so much with leadership on this, and I think that's the other thing, because I've been saying that for years. Yeah. There's enough money in the Christian Reformed Church. They could make that $4 million deficit go away in 15 minutes.
Appropriate anecdote out of that. We're here at Redeeming University College. If you heard their president speak, he talked about over a decade ago, they were really struggling, massively struggling. Enrollment down, lack of donors, endowment funds not growing, not flourishing. They got clarity, and they expressed the clarity with enthusiasm. And the net result is what we see and what we experience. Are we in that place where we as a denomination, if we express clarity with passion in a way that can unite people, that 10 years from now, conversation is a very different conversation.
I think it's the trust synod, right? You know, how many times did trust come up in every conversation we had, and rightfully so. But I think we're going to have to watch the outworking of that. We all talked about it. We all named it. So I'm interested to see in by next synod, what comes to the next synod, and are we still talking about the trust thing, or are we going to watch kind of will trust start increasing, and so that some of the factions and fear start decreasing?
What overtures mark us next year?
It's important to remember, we had COVID in here, but in a lot of ways, this chapter really got going in 2016. And so synods move slowly. This is a big body. It moves. It moves slowly. And so, and 2022 to 2024 were accelerated by COVID. I mean, we had Neelan put out that note in 2020. And so, and then COVID sort of bottled things up and isolated us. And so that stewed in 2020 and 2021 and 2022. And then I think another noteworthy thing of this Synod again was I knew that Banner, I knew that our report would pass because I knew my committee, and a committee of 25, 26 pretty randomly selected people from a body of less than 200. It's a good sample. And I knew what was in the room. And so I really didn't have much, and I really didn't think our thing was going to go down and fail. I was more worried about how would the conversation go. And so then when it was voted on and the numbers were large, again, I wasn't surprised. But I think we had another moment like we had in 2022, 23, where there's sort of a group of people that are in, and suddenly they thought they were in the majority. They thought they were on the, they were the ones in supremacy, and suddenly they realized, oh my goodness, we only got 36 votes. They got 130, 140 votes. And so that's where we are. And again, my appeal to them is don't leave.
Yes. And I hear what you're saying about there's still distinctions. My hope coming out of this synod would be what Aaliyah's already said. If we look back on this, and church planning becomes a huge thing. But my second hope for this synod is maybe it doesn't need to get really remembered for much. When I spoke to my congregation before the congregational prayer, before coming out here, I said, But I'm asking you to pray for me and pray for Sid and our denomination. It's going to sound very similar to what you've said last couple of days, but I said, adjust the thermostat. It takes time for the temperature to drop. And I know there are factions and there's already people posting in it. Where were the progressives? What was the push? I'm telling you, my experience coming before this synod was, I've only heard about or seen some of these Abide guys on the internet and heard all the commentary around them. I'm telling you, the Gravamina, which I'm going to intentionally keep saying wrong because now people are saying it wrong all the time, which is fun. The preamble that we wrote came out of, there were Abide guys in the room being really pastoral and very concerned. And I had conversations with the delegates from Iacota who had written the overture. And I know that there was, we're watching you on the floor. That happened, but it was also, we were able to say to them on the floor, hey, your tone also matters when you're holding, and I think they received it well. And so I think there is something to be said for this synod also did try to answer what's the wisest thing for the most of us with where we are right now. And it was marked by, like what Rod, you had already said, there was a lot of congenial conversation.
Right.
So I'm heartened by those things. You never get, you've said this so many times, you never get everything that you want from a synod. But if my overarching hope was this, I'm so grateful to God for those kinds of conversations and this overarching experience.
And I think Canada helped that.
For sure.
That we were on Redeemer's
100%.
campus, that we are walking a single hallway between the dining hall and back, that almost everyone was staying on campus and not driving in and doing their other things at night because they know people in the area. Like, I think this was such a gift to the denomination that this one happened when it did, forcing us to be closer.
It's true.
Good. If they'd have just had eggs and bacon together, we'd have been great.
Even if not here.
And paper towels in the bathroom. Just saying, either give me a blower that moves my hands downward or paper towels. Don't give me something where you have a 5-year-old going, I blow on it, I blow on it. That's what it was. That's what the hand dryers were.
Between the banner was found in the bathrooms and this thing. What is your obsession with bathrooms right now?
You
Is
have
it all potty humor illustrations for you?
Therapy can help. Therapy
I
can
was
help.
in youth ministry for 15 years. I want to connect with kids, talk about bodily functions. How it works. Moving forward constructively.
All right, is that it? Are we done? Have we done what we need to? Hey, Rick, have we done what we need to do? Any closing thoughts or final comments? Is our key grip going to man his test?
I'm gonna hit the only if you say we're done.
Are we done?
Actually.
We're done. Thank you all for watching. We'll see what we do with this. We forgot one. Oh, we didn't. He doesn't turn it off yet. One love.